Hello, and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. In tonight's video, I wanted to take a look at NPCs. This is something I mentioned I was going to do in my last video. I wanted to do an upcoming one on making great NPCs. And again, I'm by no means the expert. I've had boring, generic NPCs that are basically just like, question or the exclamation mark quest guys in video games and crap. We've all done it, I'm sure. Sometimes you have great NPCs, sometimes you don't. But I wanted to take a look at the NPCs I have done that have ended up being really good and, maybe take some notes from that and share some of that thoughts with you. So I think it's important right off the bat to kind of have an idea in your mind of whether this person is a major NPC or a minor NPC. And by minor NPCs, I usually mean guys that you just kind of invent at the spur of the moment, or maybe you had a name and that's really about it. You have a little note, that Tom, city guard, and you don't really have a lot more than that. However, if the NPC ends up interacting with the party a lot, you might need to make some notes. Because one thing I've noticed is that you might think that Tom's just your generic city guardsman, but once the players have talked to him, they're far more likely to want to talk to Tom anytime they need a member of the city guard. That's just the way it goes, and if you have Bill the barkeep, well, he gives them some useful information once, and forevermore the players think that he's like some kind of fence connected to the underworld who can just constantly find them information and things that they want, even if you didn't intend that. So one thing I end up doing a lot is I'll just kind of make notes on these people. I'll write, their name, what they did, and usually I'll have something like, I'll just say like bartender at what, the guzzling gizzard or whatever, right? And then I'll have an idea of what it is. And I like to do this because a lot of times when we have these kind of like throwaway NPCs like this, we don't really give a lot of thought to it and we don't put a lot of emphasis on them. But if the players want to go back, trust me, they will remember all this stuff about him. If you did a voice, they will remember that voice. If you did some sort of interesting mannerism, they will remember that, and they will expect you to remember it too. So make a note of it just for your own sake. I'm just telling you. As far as major NPCs, I think it's important to remember that not all major NPCs are necessarily going to be villains. You might have NPCs that are there to help the party. You might have some that are just kind of neutral or maybe even obstacles. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily intend the players to fight them or kill them. I've been in campaigns with some excellent game masters who've decided to stat out like basically every NPC in their world. And personally, I just find that really excessive. I don't think it's really necessary. I kind of have a general idea of what the NPC is supposed to be, but even then sometimes I don't stat them out. There's usually enough good examples in like the books, like the Monster Manual has a bunch of like NPCs in the appendixes. As I've mentioned before, I use the Tome of Beasts and the Creature Codex, which both have more NPCs you can use in the back of those books, and I'll take those kind of ideas and I'll just adjust their level up or down depending on what level the party is, adjust their hit points depending on how the fight's going, that kind of thing, right? And if you're kind of new to being a dungeon master and you're not necessarily comfortable with that, I don't think there's anything wrong with having more elaborate notes, but it can be really overwhelming if you try to just stat out everything, and it's really making a lot of work for yourself that you probably don't need to do. I mean, even if you have just a complete party of murder hobos who just want to kill everything, you probably don't need to stat it out. That's just my opinion, though. So one of the things I wanted to mention is if I have major NPCs, whether they're allies or enemies, I usually want to think about what does this person want to do, what is their usual method, like their modus operandi type of thing, and what is their current opinion of the party. I mean, sometimes you'll have somebody who's kind of neutral or maybe even a little negative or hostile, but they might not necessarily be aggressive. That doesn't mean they want to fight the party. They might just not want to help them much. And that goes for minor NPCs too. You know, you could have some guy who's just a level 0 peasant, but he doesn't like all these adventurers coming to his town all the time and thinks that they're just ruining things and bringing trouble on their heads. But he also probably isn't dumb enough to want to fight the party because he knows he's just going to get killed. But if the party needs to go to him for information or something else like that later, he just might tell him he doesn't know anything. Oh, I didn't see anything. I don't know. Sorry, I was out working in the field. Didn't see. Even if he did, because he just doesn't like adventurers, right? So, have an idea of what the NPC wants, how they plan to achieve their goals, and just what their general attitude is. And something I took from a game called Vampire the Masquerade, players and NPCs had their true nature, and they also had their demeanor, which was how they acted. Now, Vampire, they had like tons of lists of categories, and it was actually fairly involved. I don't think you need to get that in depth, at least not for D&D. But I do think it's important to realize that not all NPCs are going to be playing their hand, right? They're not going to, they might be kind of cunning and manipulative, and maybe that's their true nature. But their outward demeanor is to be friendly and gregarious, and gregarious, sorry, and that might be how they act in public. So, and vice versa, right? I mean, I'm sure we probably all have friends that are kind of jerks to people that you don't know, but when you are friends with them, they're actually really, really cool. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I've had a lot of female friends that are kind of rude to people at like the bar and stuff, but they're actually, really fun when you get to know them. And the truth is, if you're like a 9 out of 10, you got 100 guys a night hitting on you at the bar. You can't be nice to all those people. You don't have time for that, so cut the poor girl some slack, So anyway, my point is that who you appear to be and who you really are aren't always the same, and that goes for your NPCs too. A couple other things I want to talk about. I've seen a lot of dungeon masters who will have like little 3x5 index cards for NPCs. I personally think that's a great idea. I usually just use notes, and I'm kind of a big note taker, so that's usually what I do. But making a note about their alignment or any distinguishing features or a hair color, these aren't always bad ideas either. You just kind of want to have an idea in your mind of who this person is, so it's easier to play them and easier to portray that to the party. I also want to say that there's nothing wrong with going against expectations. You don't want to do it every time, but we'll go back to the example of Tom the city guard. Now, Tom might just want to be the best city guard he can be, really. He's just super vigilant and he takes his work absolutely seriously. And there's nothing wrong with that. That makes for an interesting player or non-player character. But Tom might also be really lazy and he just wants to do the minimum work possible while still getting a paycheck. He doesn't want to get fired, he doesn't want to do anything that's going to cost him his job, but he's also not super vigilant. And if the players know this, they might be able to take advantage of that. And that makes him already a little more interesting, in my opinion, than Tom the super serious guard. Don't have every NPC just be hostile to the party. I am convinced that this is one of the biggest causes of murder hoboism, because the players start getting in this mindset where everything is a struggle. They go to buy something at the market and the shopkeepers give them a hard time and trying to haggle with them over every single copper, and then they go somewhere else and it's the same thing, and they meet nobles that are all just a bunch of pompous jerks. And if they start feeling like every NPC is just there to hassle them and make their lives difficult, it's kind of common nature that they're just going to start treating them all like enemies. So, to me, that's kind of partly on me too. And I'm sure many of you have had players that murder hoboism is their first resort, not their last resort. And in that case, it's not all your fault. Trust me, it could be your players. But I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to work with them a little and have people that are a little on their side. Conversely, don't have every NPC love the players either. They should have to struggle with some. They should have some people that are kind of, snobbish if they're nobles and kind of look down on these adventurers. But again, remember that that doesn't mean they want to pick a fight with the adventurers. They might well realize that there's a lot of these guys, they probably have magic, they probably have powerful stuff. I don't want to pick a fight with them. But, you know, they can find like little ways of being kind of petty maybe. And that kind of makes them a little more interesting. If, like, the worst NPCs, in my opinion, are the ones that don't get any reaction. If the players think, hey, this guy's kind of cool, or if they think, wow, I don't like this guy, you know, either one of those is better than just complete ambivalence, because that's going to stand out in their minds a little more. If like I'm a big fan of a lot of Cthulhu, like Lovecraftian type stuff, so I wanted to make a quick note on names, and that is that there's nothing wrong with Nyarlathotep and names like that. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it. It's so ridiculous. But I like to combine it with some sort of title, because your party's never going to be able to remember that necessarily. But it does sound very distinct, so they might go, oh yeah, we remember hearing about that guy. So if you have, you know, Zerdashoth, Lord of Change, then when the party hears that, they're going to be like, A, I'll never be able to pronounce that, but B, I'm probably going to know kind of who this guy is, right? And if you describe it, and he's like this chaos god who, you know, just ever changing and morphing, and it doesn't even have a stable form. I can't even control his form because he's the Lord of Change, you know? And then players will be like, oh, okay, and then that sparks some cool visual images in their minds. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with just, after you've referred to him by his full name a few times, just calling him the Lord of Change. I think that kind of stuff is fine. In a lot of my games, I have a 2-part video called Running a Mystery, or Running Mysteries, and I refer to the Golden Queen, who was kind of like the big bad in my campaign. And she did have an actual name, but, you know, once I called her the Golden Queen a bunch, everybody just called her the Golden Queen. And, you know, a title is easy to remember, so I kind of like giving things titles. And it helps to kind of give people an image in their mind of who this person is. Also, don't throw like 6 NPCs at them in one night that all have names starting with the same letter. You know, if you have 5 or 6 or 4 or whatever guys, and all their names start with S's, the party's just gonna get confused. They're not gonna be able to keep them all straight. They're not gonna know who's who, and that's not their fault necessarily. You know, so don't go crazy on naming everybody the same thing. If you have, you know, like 3 brothers, for example, or 3 sisters, and they're pretty much interchangeable, then I think that kind of thing can be fine, because it's kind of a pun, and then people are just going to remember, oh yeah, that's the 3 brothers who all start with R, or whatever, right? And, you know, so that can be kind of funny, especially if their actual names and personalities don't really matter, because they're basically all the same guy anyways. Then, you know, that's kind of fun. That can be its own little in-joke. But in general, you know, keep these kind of things in mind. Another idea, something I've seen, I'm going to talk about this more probably I'm going to make a video at some point about like city campaigns and stuff. This is another idea that I took from Vampire the Masquerade, which is NPC maps of how all the NPCs think about each other. There's like, you know, pictures with them all. You don't have to do pictures. You can just put a box on a piece of paper and put the guy's name in it if you want. But then they have like, like this guy thinks he's odd. This guy thinks that guy's cute. This guy thinks he's a man. He thinks he's my man. You got untrustworthy and loyalty, you know. So it'll have different arrows with just how this NPC thinks about this one. And they can be as simple as you want or as complicated as you want. In my last campaign, I had a map for all the merchant houses and another one for all the noble houses. And, you know, a lot of them might have alliances, or they might be openly hostile to one another. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily fighting in the streets. I can't talk tonight. I'm getting tired. But, sorry. But, you know, they could be more or less enemies without coming to actual bloodshed. That's pretty common in those kind of situations. And just because they're allies doesn't necessarily mean they're friends, right? It could be a relationship of convenience. And if they get a better offer, they might be willing to betray that alliance. I like to have notes on all that kind of stuff. And if I have notes, then it starts getting really easy to work that stuff into a story, right? Like if I know these guys are allies of convenience, then I could maybe drop some hints and the players can maybe try to take advantage of that. Maybe they're the ones to make a better offer. And then it opens up a lot more story elements which the players can use, and it doesn't have to be resolved through combat, which is always kind of a nice option. So that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to give some specific examples of NPCs that I think worked out really well in some of my campaigns, and maybe some ideas of things that you can take from these and incorporate them in your own. So in my most recent campaign, I had a couple of really good NPCs, I thought. One was actually, he started as a minor NPC and became a lot more important. His name was Vance. And Vance was like a retired smuggler. At one point, one of the city guard captains, the city was under siege. There was a giant army outside that wasn't really attacking yet. They were trying to starve the city out. So one of the city watch guards came to the party and said, hey, I want you guys to approach this ex-smuggler, see if he has any contacts, because, you know, these guys have been operating for 20 years. We haven't been able to catch them, and they're bringing stuff in and out of the city. I want to cut a deal where they can still keep some of the money for themselves, but we want to be able to procure supplies for the city. And if I try to do this, there's no way they're going to trust me. So I want to hire you guys as intermediaries on the city's behalf to at least be able to bring in some stuff. And obviously, I don't expect these criminals to just work for free. But if we kind of give them a free pass during the siege, then, you know, maybe we can work out a deal, right? So he didn't know any of the current, you know, main bosses, but he's like, okay, we have this guy named Vance who claimed he retired and went straight. Try talking to him. So in Vance's case, he was like the leader of this, you know, kind of ex-gang that had all retired. So the party meet him. They're in this tavern. The tavern, though, is pretty somber and dead. And when they first meet Vance, him and his buddies are playing cards with this halfling who basically looks like he's been feeble-minded. He had like an intelligence of 3 at this point. And the thing is, they're all playing for money, but they're letting the halfling win. And then the party noticed that, you know, they'd slide some money over to whoever actually had the best hand. But for the most part, they were just letting this guy win. And so that kind of piqued the party's interest. Like, why are they doing that, right? Turns out this guy is the owner, him and his wife, and he, you know, used to be a fully functional adult, but something happened and now he's being enfeebled, and these guys were all friends of his, so mostly out of like pity, they still come here and try to help his wife out by spending money in their tavern. But just the whole mood kind of sucks because he's an awkward guy to be around. And so Vance has this idea that maybe he can, you know, like change things and turn things around again. So he challenges the party to competition and tells them, look, if you win, me and my friends will answer any of your questions. But if I win, then you're going to go over to that table, you're going to sit down, you're going to order nice big meals, and you're going to leave the poor little halfling lady a giant fat tip, and then you're going to go and you're never going to bother us again. And the party ends up winning the challenge. And so Vance and his buddies answer their questions, and they end up having a pretty fun competition. I won't go into the details because that alone could take 20 minutes. But it ended up being a lot of fun, and the party went back multiple times to engage in further competitions and to, you know, talk to Vance and his buddies and get more information. And Vance was just kind of like, you know, this obviously doesn't care about the law. I guess he'd be like chaotic neutral, maybe even chaotic good. But, you know, was fiercely loyal to his people that he thinks of as his and that are kind of under his protection. And the party ended up really liking Vance, and he ended up being, you know, a good source of information on future missions. In the same campaign, one of the main villains I had was a demon queen by the name of Bellatrix, the Widow of Lust. So once again, working in a cool title. And Bellatrix, I mean, she's a demon queen, obviously. She's chaotic evil. She was very, very, very powerful. And she was one of the main final villains. Not the final villain, but she was up there, right? She was near the end of the campaign. And this campaign went all the way from 1 to 20. So one of the things I thought was interesting about her is when I thought about her MO, I liked the idea that she was like this seductress, she's chaotic evil, but she doesn't want to just like rampage and destroy things. She likes to like corrupt things and watch it turn against itself and destroy itself from the inside. So she would like seduce different people of power, and she could like change shapes so she could appear like basically anybody she wanted. And she can like teleport and things like that. And she was actually like several different people throughout the city, always like trying to seduce people of influence and, turning the city against itself, more or less, and then watching it just eat itself. And I thought that was kind of a cool MO. That being said, she was also very powerful in hand-to-hand combat. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been a high-level threat to the party. But one of the things I liked about her is that in one of her guises, she met the party, or at least one of the members of the party, when they were level 1. She was pretending to be like this lowly acolyte in this temple, and one of the players was a paladin in the same temple. Now, they later figured out that this acolyte, who was going by the name of Leandrin, which I stole from Wheel of Time. Oh, that's another note on names. Don't be afraid to steal names. They're going to trigger something in your mind so it's easy to remember. I use names from different people I know. I might change it slightly, or whatever. But then it's easy for me to remember the name. I'm not have to flip through pages and pages of notes to find it. In my Shadowrun campaign I ran, one of the main adversaries was a Russian mob, and I took a bunch of Russian hockey players and just changed their names around, So I'd take like Alexander Ovechkin and Sergei Fedorov, and I'd have like Alexander Fedorov, and that would be one of the Russian mobsters, that kind of thing. And it would just be easy for me to remember. So that's a quick hint on names. Don't be afraid to do that. And don't be afraid to, pattern stuff off people you know. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Maybe don't take people the players know, but, people you know. So anyways, like I said, the players met Bellatrix when they were level 1, but they didn't know who she was. They later found out that the high priest of that temple, who was also one of the crown justices, was having an affair with a lowly neonate named Leandrin. So basically, the king in the city was still on the throne, but he was in his 80s and he had dementia. So he wasn't making any decisions at this point. But he was also still alive, so none of his heirs could really take the throne, and the succession was a little messy anyways, because he'd been married 3 times, and he'd kind of named his only daughter from the 3rd wife to be the heir, but, she had older half-siblings, so things were kind of a mess. And basically you had the 3 crown justices who were really making most important decisions at this point. And then there was lesser justices below them who were making decisions as well. So this high priest, it was not only the high priest of one of the most powerful temples in the city, but he's also one of the 3 crown justices. So he started making some rather weird political decisions. This kind of tipped the party off that something was strange here. They found out he's having an affair with this acolyte from the temple. They figure he's probably being blackmailed. Now, it turns out, of course, the party didn't know this, but the acolyte, of course, is Bellatrix, who seduced him, and she's the one who caused him to make some weird decisions. But they did expose the affair, and he basically had to resign in disgrace. Bellatrix didn't really care much because she'd kind of done her damage there, but this did kind of put the party on her radar. So this is when they first found her. Like I said, they were level 1. There was no chance of them fighting her at this point because obviously she would have destroyed the party. But I liked the idea that they met her early. They met her again later as well. She was in one of her other guises. She was pretending to be a vampire bride of this one vampire lord who ran this like underground vampire cult essentially. And like most vampire lords, he had like 5 or 6 different vampire brides. They all seemed to. This guy was just more of a player than some of the others. But even he'd been fooled by her, of course, and he just thought she was a vampire because she was pretending to be a vampire. And she wasn't even pretending to be like anything particularly great. But when the party shows up to fight this guy, she's just like, well, peace out. I think your time here is done. And she just abandons him and teleports out. But she telepathically tells one of the party members that they would meet again, and she tells them where they would meet. And this is because she's been watching the party ever since they exposed her, poor priest guy. And Her grand plan was that she basically wants to destroy this entire plane of existence. And to do that, she needs Bahamut and Tiamat to both be destroyed. Bahamut's been locked away in this like extra dimensional prison, and so she wants to free Bahamut so that that will draw out Tiamat, cause them both to fight, and then she wants to finish off whoever wins once they're weak and almost destroyed. There's a prophecy involved with this, which one of the players had found, because he, of course, was the guy to fulfill the prophecy. And his character was actually a barbarian, but he was a Path of the Zealot, and he followed Bahamut. So he needed this axe, which was like the symbol of Bahamut, and that would allow him, the follower of Bahamut carrying his axe, would be able to unlock the prison. So, realizing what's happening, she doesn't want to destroy the party at this point. You know, she wants to manipulate them into opening the prison so that Bahamut can be freed and he will fight Tiamat. And then, you know, like I said, she wants to finish off the winner. So she actually is helping the party at this point, even though she's clearly going to betray them and try to destroy this entire plane of existence later. The party also found different images of her in a few different places. At one point, they found this old temple, and all the leaders of the temple were now undead. But there was a mural at one point, and it showed this king being crowned, and there's this army kneeling before him. But in the background, there's this woman with giant, like, bird wings, like black bird wings, and she was extremely beautiful in the mural. And she's just kind of like way in the background, though, in the shadows, right? And barely visible. And most attention is on the guy with the crown, which, of course, is emblematic of her entire modus operandi, working through other people and seducing people of power to do her will. They end up fighting the undead guy with the crown later because they recognize the crown. But, you know, of course, there's no sign of her, but they didn't think much of it. They also went to a different continent at one point, and they found murals. They didn't really investigate the murals, otherwise it would have told the story of how the priests turned their backs on the old gods in order to worship some newer, better gods, which included Bellatrix, the Widow of Lust, and directly led to the entire downfall of their civilization. There's a statue of her outside as well, a giant statue, but it was all weathered from the elements, and one of the wings was broken off, so they didn't really have much chance to recognize her. Point is, though, I was trying to layer in like elements of her or encounters with her, so that when she actually fought the party, it wouldn't be like this, like, oh, okay, now it's just another generic villain with a different stat block. It was going to be like, oh, hey, you know, we've been running into this chick all over the place, it turns out, and she's been kind of like watching us and observing us and even helping us at times, and it just helps to make the fight a lot more personal. And so when she actually meets them at the prison of Bahamut, she's originally in the form of that acolyte from the temple, and with her are a bunch of guards and the former crown justice. And so the party was kind of surprised at first. They're like, hey, wait, I thought we were supposed to be meeting the vampire chick here. And she's just like, oh, you haven't figured it out. And then she like starts changing into all these different forms through which she had met the party earlier. And then, of course, goes into her actual form of her like demon queen with her giant bat wings, or giant bird wings, sorry. The fight ended up being really intense as well. She actually killed 2 party members, but they were like level 18 at this point, so they had wishes and resurrections and everything else. Didn't end up mattering. But it was an excellent fight. It was a very memorable encounter. And I like the fact that she really stood out because, you know, when they started seeing that, oh, this woman has been really in our story ever since the beginning. Like level 1 party members were encountering her already, you know? And it just makes things a lot more interesting. So just make sure your party doesn't try to fight her at level 1 because, you know, she was like CR 26 or 27, somewhere around there. She was ridiculous. I want to mention a couple other NPCs. I won't go into as much detail, but in my Shadowrun campaign, I had an NPC named Min. And basically, the party were like this terrorist cell, and they were part of a giant network, but their cell was, you know, kind of self-isolated. They had an NPC named Duncan who had recruited all of them, and he was got the guy that gave them like their missions and whatnot, right? But Duncan had been recruited by Min, so she was his superior. And at one point, Duncan ends up stepping away. He ends up achieving what he wanted, and the party started working for Min directly. And Min was another one that I'd kind of layered in early. One of the players ended up having a vision of a bunch of future events, and one of these events, he seems to be in like a rocket ship or something, and he's in this chair and he's all like strapped in, and he looks over and he sees this other woman, and she's in like an astronaut suit with the helmet and everything else, and she like looks at him and gives him this reassuring smile, and she's all strapped into her chair, and he'd never seen her before, but she seemed as if she was familiar with them at that point, right? Sure enough, they end up meeting her, and he realizes, oh, this is who that was. She's going to come with us on some space mission at some point. And with her, I wanted to think about like what kind of person is trying to fight like the most powerful corporations on Earth. And I really liked the idea that she was like a political anarchist. And for those of you who aren't familiar with anarchy as like a political philosophy and just think that it's like Mad Max, you know, everybody just doing whatever and shooting people up and whatever, it's not that at all. It's basically like how to like run a society without any sort of state or government. And so I actually did a bunch of research into like political anarchy in order to make a better philosophy for her and to kind of understand how she was going to think and what her MO was. And it made her a very interesting and distinct NPC because she had a well-developed philosophy that didn't necessarily match what the PCs had, and it was slightly different from what Duncan even had, you know? And it just helped to make her a more well-rounded and interesting individual. And the fact that she was there to help the players was kind of a nice change as well. The last one I'm going to mention really quickly, I've talked about him before, but his name was Rowan, and he was a bard. And he was supposed to infiltrate the party because he was one of the villains and then like spy on them. Unfortunately, the party figured this out before it happened, and they kind of captured him and tortured him and, you know, got a confession out of him. And it's funny because, you know, he was just kind of a douchebag, but he was also pretty funny. And he's just, you know, like most bards, he was just this like man whore womanizer type, right? And, you know, the torture scene ended up being actually really intense as well, so that was pretty good. But it was the kind of thing where I remember after the campaign, several players all said that they thought Rowan was one of the best NPCs in any game ever. And I was like, wow, really? So I started thinking about it later, and I'm like, what made him so good? But really, I think a lot of it was that he was very flamboyant and very, you know, kind of like over the top outwardly. But again, inwardly, he was a completely different person. And they started to see those elements. And it made him a much more complex character than a lot of other NPCs I've made. And like I said, I've had terrible NPCs too from time to time, right? It happens. In fact, you know, a lot of NPCs, they don't necessarily have to be great. Sometimes all you need is somebody to just give the party a quest. And that's okay too. But if the party want to interact with him more, you should probably have an idea of what this guy wants and what he's trying to achieve. I wanted to make another note about villains before I end the video. There's an excellent channel called How to Be a Great Game Master or How to Be a Great GM. And Guy, who hosts that channel, he has a question or a statement that he always has for his villains. And basically the idea of any great story is somebody wants something very badly and they're having trouble getting it. The thing is, the person who wants something very badly isn't the heroes, it's the villain. It's Sauron who wants the Ring of Power. It's, you know, Megatron trying to take over the Earth, but those pesky Autobots keep getting in the way. It could be Gargamel just trying to gather up all the Smurfs, but the Smurfs aren't cooperating. But any story, it's usually the villain driving the action. You know, look at Star Wars, for example. Darth Vader wants the stolen Death Star plans, but through whatever circumstances, he's having trouble getting them back. You know, and this is usually the motivation for the story. It's really the villain who decides what the story is going to be and who drives that. The heroes are the ones who are going to react, and they're going to decide how the story goes. But the actual like driving force of the story is going to be from the villain. I wanted to say really quickly as well, there's nothing wrong with having like weird, crazy villains. Like I personally consider the Joker from Batman comics to be an amazing villain. But I don't want every villain to be the Joker. even though I love the Joker. I look at guys like Magneto, and I think that Magneto is also one of the greatest villains ever. Because Magneto, he's kind of more like what I mentioned with Min, but a villain, where he has his own philosophy. Comic Book Girl 19 often commented that Magneto and Xavier were kind of like Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King, where, you know, one thinks that they can coincide peacefully and everything should be able to get along. The other one, not so much. And when you look at Magneto, I mean, here's a guy who survived Auschwitz in World War II and has seen the worst that humanity has to offer. But he also sees humanity going down that same path with mutant kind and thinks like, hey, I've already gone through this once. I'm not going to let it happen again. And if it's going to come down to humans versus mutants, and I'm a mutant, then mutants are going to win. And you can understand why a guy like that thinks the way he does. And I think if Magneto was more of like, I'm going to act in self-defense, he wouldn't really be so villainous. And there's been times when Marvel Comics have tried to kind of redeem Magneto and make him into more of an anti-hero. And that's just made him a better character in a lot of ways, in my opinion. But I personally like him best as like that basically villain, where it's like he's more than willing to use self-defense, but every now and then he's also willing to strike without provocation. And you know, that's what makes him a villain, not a hero. And I think that having a good mix of villains is great. Not every villain needs to be a I want to destroy the earth or I want to conquer the earth type of villain. Some of them are, you know, some of them are whatever the guy's name is from Die Hard, where he just, you know, Hans Gruber, I just want to be rich, you know, and but he's an exceptional villain. He is an amazing character, you know. John Malkovich's character from In the Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood is another excellent villain, you know. And again, not trying to take over the earth or anything like that. He was like Secret Service or something, got fired and got framed and set up. Now he's angry about it, so he decides I'm going to kill the president. And he even tells Clint Eastwood at one point, says, you know, the difference between us is that I am perfectly willing to die to achieve my means, but you want to live, and that's why you can't beat me. And it's just kind of a cool thing to think about. Like, yeah, if the villain's willing to go to any lengths to win, well, you know, including die, then he's going to be hard to stop. So anyways, those are my thoughts on NPCs and villains in particular. I'm sure I've probably missed a lot of stuff that would have been useful, but that's everything I've got right now. Feel free to like if you like the video, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave comments in the comment section. I'd love to hear about great villains in your own campaigns, or if you were a player and said, hey, like, I was in a game and this Dungeon Master, like, just the greatest villain ever. I love to see those kind of stories. Reading the comments is definitely one of my favorite aspects of running a YouTube channel so far. It's just being able to interact with people that I don't even know and hear their ideas for character builds or other things. And it's just fun, you know, that kind of like back and forth type idea. So feel free to leave comments, and I'll see you next time.